Are you suffering from staff turnover? Too many lost business opportunities? Is your reputation at risk? If so, you know your workplace culture needs improvement, but determining how to do so and where to start is about as fun and effective as trying to assemble a puzzle with no picture to guide you. Culture Change in a Box is a show that takes you on a compelling deep dive into an effective real-time culture change process so you can begin to feel hopeful and re-energized about your business. And now, here are your hosts for Culture Change in a Box, Chris McClellan and Judy Ryan.
Well, greetings, everyone. It's Chris McClellan from the Whole Care Network. You might know me as the Bowtie Guy. I haven't used that in a while in our last couple of episodes, Judy, but I am the Bowtie Guy.
Yeah, you sure are.
I sure are. That's Judy Ryan from Lifework Systems.
Hello, everybody.
Judy, it's great to see you.
I'm great. Happy to see you, too.
Happy day. You know, we're here, and we haven't talked about our little facility that we're
beautiful.
Beautiful facility here in Frontenac, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, my hometown. It's great to be back. Great to be back in the hometown here.
Beautiful room, a lot of natural light.
A lot of natural light.
We're living a life we love.
We're living a life for love, and you know we mentioned it before, but we'll be doing some video podcasts, and people will have some audience participation as we wrap ourselves around our new little project here. We're having a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, in our last episode of Culture Change in a Box, we talked about building capacity, and today we're going to go into the deeper dive of what happens when we kick off culture change.
Yes, and I am so excited to talk about this. There's a lot of moving parts with this.
I can imagine.
So I want to try to be succinct enough and clear enough of how we do this. But what really happens is that once we have that critical buy-in from the top leaders, we have to kind of put them through the mill in a sense, because there's a lot to learn pretty quickly for them and a lot of processes that they just kind of have to trust us to take them through. So one of the things we do is we sit down with them and we do a pretty long planning session. It's usually about 3 hours. And we really go through all the details for the project that they're getting ready to enter, which is how to create an extraordinary workplace culture. So we go over things like the timeline. What are the roles and responsibilities of everybody? What are the initial communications that they're doing? What are the commitments that they're going to be speaking about and having conversations about? What are the potential challenges that they're facing? We're also working with them to clarify and set performance targets. So, like for an example, a performance target area might be gossip. Somebody might say, we have a problem with gossip.
Gossip in the workplace?
Yeah, does that happen? Yeah, that's almost, people almost think it's just a built-in thing, but it's really not, and it's very problematic. So that's actually a target area. A specific performance target would be to say, we have this many incidences of gossip happening every day or week, and we want to reduce it to this number. So that's where you clarify, what are these return on investment kinds of changes are we going to make, whether it's retention or gossip or raising revenues or increasing satisfaction of customers or employees, things like that. So we're helping them to set those targets and to define their purpose and values. So that's a lot right there. And what we also do is we take them through a process of understanding various temperaments, kind of similar to like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC profile, only we use a model that's very memorable. It's based on colors. And it allows people to recognize significant differences in temperament and personality. So we go over with the employee, the leader, and their team, what their colors are and what their temperament and values are and what their combination of values will produce and where they may have blind spots and where they have strengths as a result of those. And so we're going over that information. We're also introducing to them who we are through our colors and our value system and the way we function. And so there's a deep level of social interest, social intelligence around who all the players are and how we're going to interact together. And we're working with them on understanding what's going to happen next at the kickoff session, what's going to happen with their people. We're reviewing the 7 steps, the scope of work, the general timelines. We're helping them to identify a plan that works for them specifically. And so there's a lot of things happening all at once for those leaders. And so we make sure that we spend the time to help them understand This is what capacity building is. This is what your timeline looks like. This is what the time requirement is. And we'll go through things like this is the specific objectives and steps for mentoring people. And these are the reasons why you're going to be mentoring people. And this is what it will look like. And these are some of the scenarios of things that happen. And these are some of the things that are happening out in the larger world where culture change is occurring, both the good and the bad things that are happening, right, as they go through that process of change. And we start to actually facilitate with them, how do you lead these group sessions? Because we're going to have you up and running like a patient that just got surgery. You're going to have them up the next day, right? Well, we're kind of a baptism in fire with them as well. So when they learn this process in this project, like literally within weeks, they're going to be facilitating group meetings. They're going to be sitting down and mentoring staff in ways that they've never done before. So it's quite an education, and it's quite a hit the ground running kind of activity.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the colors.
Yes.
As I think of what I heard you say, is it's really a way for people to understand themselves and each other a little bit better.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we make a lot of assumptions that everybody sort of thinks the way we do and values the same things we value. And sometimes we hit smack in the face that we don't.
Right.
But most of the time we just think that's some kind of weird anomaly. But the reality is that we're all operating out of very diverse sets of values. And in the model we use, it could be a combination of at least, I think it's 64 or something like that, models, combinations, because we are affected by our highest priority values, then the next level of priority values, and all of those value systems that are within us combine to create very specific ways that we approach life, the kinds of work we're drawn to, the kinds of ways we like to show up. And it's really, really helpful to understand that. I can usually sit with a person for about 15 minutes and already know what colors they are, what value system they're operating out of. I'll know how they like to be communicated with, how they like to lead, what causes them conflict and stress, all kinds of things like that. And that's really helpful for me so that I can make sure that I'm able to be more effective because of that person.
You're an effective communicator because you understand where the person is coming from.
Yes. So, for example, there's a combination of colors in particular that do not like, they almost shun emotional expressiveness. I happen to have one of my colors that is that way and my secondary color that is not that way. So it kind of balances me a little. But sometimes you'll have somebody that has two of the four colors that are like really averse to emotional expression, for example. So it is not uncommon for situations to occur where the emotional component just kind of freaks them out. Well, it's helpful if I know, they're this color, and I can be responsive in a way that addresses it through maybe the intellect, so that they can receive the information in a way. So it's kind of an advantage to understand who you're talking to and what matters to them and what frightens them and what causes them stress, so that you can actually hit head on things that you don't understand how to do otherwise.
What a great tool for a manager to be able to use in order to make this deeper dive into culture change.
It is a great tool. It is only one, though, and I think the important thing to remember about the model overall is it really does have a significant amount of moving parts. There's something that I'm going to just say this so that we know. I'm going to take a minute and find this information. So one of the things that we do is we create documents that help the leaders look at what's occurring kind of simultaneously. So some of those tools are things like just an at-a-glance timeline. So it identifies all the things that they're going to go through in that first meeting, all the things they're going to go through in terms of their scheduling, all the things that they're going to go through at the kickoff session. The kickoff session is the one where we go in side by side with the leader and we deliver the information on, here are the guidelines for this project, and this is what everybody's going to be engaging in, and here's the surveys we're going to be doing, and here's the game plan. And so we're always over-communicating to the leaders on the various steps that they're going to be doing over a year-long project. That's typically what happens. And then usually they'll go into a year 2 or 3. Because culture change, the goal of culture change for us as a company has always been How do we help them? How do we work ourselves out of a job with them? Where when we leave, they're so self-sustaining in that culture model, and we've done our job in effectively transferring all the components of making it operational into their hands. So that usually takes a couple of years if you've got, 10, 15 people even.
Sure.
And so what we do is we go over with them, this is the scope of the work that you're going to be doing. So there's going to be certain key activities that you're going to be going through. And you want to know what the corresponding new condition is that you're creating. Because I don't know if you're like this, but to me, if somebody's helping me, I want to understand what problem are they solving for me.
Oh, very much so.
And what does it look like?
Right.
What does the end game look like? Then I can more easily move through the key activities to getting there. So we really focus on, going through processes around how are we assessing things? How are we and using analysis with you? So you're analyzing a lot of things. You're analyzing things on the micro level and on the macro level. And then what are the key activities that have to do with implementing? It's training, it's mentoring, it's implementation processes. So there's a whole set of key activities and then new conditions that are created. And then we have a whole set of activities that are related to testing and integrating and maintaining the culture changes that are going on. So we're always bringing them back around. On the micro level, it's how do I help people manage relationships, productivity, and engagement. But on the business side of things, the systems level, we're focusing on how do you assess, analyze, test, maintain, and implement change. And so that's really, kind of a double whammy for those leaders.
Can be a little scary.
It can be, but I think that's why, and I know this is going to sound like a ruthless plug for myself, but it's really helpful to have people that can think in a systems manner,
very much
that
so.
Have built the machine so that you don't have to reinvent anything to understand what are these key activities and how are we stepping through the roadmap to creating these new conditions that we want to create. Does that make sense?
Sure, and of course having the roadmap is essential to helping create the change.
Yes, and having the roadmap and having the consciousness to be aware of when people are in rebellion and resistance, and it's our job when we're working with the leaders to recognize where they get discouraged and they hit barriers. And so we are constantly sort of scanning for how can we make sure that they maintain clarity around why this is meaningful to do and what your end game is that you're going for, so that they can move through their. Most of the time when people are rebelling and resisting, I want to just talk to that for a minute. It isn't because they're bad. It isn't because they're control freaks themselves. It's usually that there's a barrier in their way that they don't know how to overcome. So, yeah, I mean, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just saying, and I think we've chatted about this before. It's, change can be hard for people.
It can, and I think that it isn't even just change. It's understanding how do I reconcile this change with who I am. And sometimes it takes a little, getting to that so that you can actually move into acceptance as opposed to resistance. So when I have somebody confront me with a barrier, I kind of rub my hands gleefully together like a mad scientist, like, oh, yay, this is an opportunity. And so when I think I mentioned that one time recently we had an employee that wrote in their survey, I can't believe you're telling us we have to care about lovableness in the workplace culture, right? Well, A, I knew this person's colors and that would be hard for them.
Right.
B, I knew that they wouldn't have shared that information with me if they weren't crying for help. Right?
Yes.
So most people would have gone like, oh, well, that's terrible. Look she's really resistant. No, she needed me to help her to see this through a lens that she could accept the information. So I used an intellectual approach with her and said, look, if you had two scenarios and this person felt lovable in this one and didn't in this one, what's going to bring the best result forward, right? So I used statistics. I used information that's best practice that have been proven, peer-reviewed data, because that person needed to overcome the barrier that felt too squishy with her around the words until she could say, oh, I get that. I can get on board with that. And so part of what we're always doing is helping people to recognize their barriers so they can get over them. And most of the time they do.
Well, sometimes the hardest thing is to recognize it.
It is so hard. I think we think that we're being really compliant and or even cooperative when we're really not. And that's why we don't like to see it in other people and call them out on it, because then it means I have to know when I'm doing it too. So that's why I have to keep doing my own work and have my own coach, because otherwise I could become very blind to, helping someone else if I'm not doing the work myself.
And isn't a lot of this being aware of our purpose and our values?
Being aware of our purpose and values is a choice. The really beautiful thing about being a human being is we have free will. We can choose to be purpose-driven, or we can choose to say, no, I don't want to be purpose-driven. The reason purpose is so important is because in the vacuum of it, if it's not there, our default is typically to go to the dark side. I know that sounds very dramatic, but it really is true. You're tired, you're discouraged, you're confused, you feel inept, you feel powerless. Where does your mind typically go? It goes into kind of the guttery places.
Those are the dark side,
yeah,
sure.
like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'll never be able to get out of this. That's kind of where we go. Purpose is like an anchor. When I'm having a hard time, I'm looking at what do I need to do to get back to the place where I love my life? And what values do I need to pull on that will help me get there? Like some of my values are things like meditation and faith, because those for me personally help me back when I feel the most lost from my purpose. But the purpose itself is like a trajectory that I'm shooting for.
Sure.
So if I leave that up to chance, the default will not be pretty generally. Unless you happen to be raised in a household where you were incredibly loved and supported and kind of understood that intrinsically without ever having to understand it intellectually, most people have not been raised in that kind of a culture.
Is that why people get stuck?
They do. We all do. We get stuck because we have limiting beliefs and we don't often know how to get out of that. Or I would say, we have a certain way that we digest information. And we need somebody to be sensitive to that. So one of the things we do is, like, one of my kids had a friend who she couldn't take a test at school unless they read it to her. Like, she was an auditory learner. And part of the reason why there are barriers are that we even have barriers around the way that we assimilate information and receive it effectively. So we're always thinking about things like, what are the kinesthetic, auditory, visual needs? How do we use humor, data, processes, inspiration, things like that, because there are so many different filters that people have. And we have to be able to help them to hear the information and wake up to the information, and we can't do that if we're not aware of who they are.
So when we're taking that deeper dive, we also have to be aware of the filters.
Yes. Not only of them, but of us.
But of us as...
Yeah. And sometimes for many people, they didn't even know they had those limitations and those filters. So do you want to talk a little bit about that with the regards to...
Yeah.
So one of the things that is really important to know is that change requires a high level of consciousness and commitment, okay? And we all think, oh, well, I'm on board for that. I'm doing that all the time, right? Well, the statistics show that 90% of all companies don't have, or all people, don't have a planning process for anything. They just don't make plans. They don't think it through.
So winging it's not a plan?
Winging it's not a plan. I know people who do that. It would drive me nuts. Also, only 50% of the time do people envision what they want. So we go into things without really clarity around what is the end game I'm going for.
What's the end game?
And out of the whole population, about 71% are disengaged. So those are really important statistics. And the last one is 88% of all businesses don't have a specific plan for how they're going to grow their business. And that could be on many levels. Like my company has recently had to work on how we're going to grow the business fiscally, how we're going to guide the business going forward in its growth and its development, but we don't do it on any front. About 88% of the companies don't even have a plan, a business plan or otherwise. So one of the things that happens is we don't even know how asleep we are. So I talked to you a little bit about, I'm going to do this exercise, and I want you listeners to go through this exercise as if you were in the room doing this exercise with us. So let's say you're in a big group of people, and you are the main volunteer that has come up to the front of the room. And I have some ropes and blindfolds. Doesn't that sound fun?
Oh, right? My goodness.
When we do this with real audiences, it's really funny because we ask for 5 volunteers to come up. And there's a main one. And then we bring out the ropes and the blindfolds, and they're like, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? So imagine you are that central volunteer, and I'm going to put a rope around your belt, and I'm going to tie this rope in a tight bow like you would tie a shoelace, right? And then I'm going to hold up this huge representation of something that you love. Like most of the time we use a big chocolate bar, so we usually ask for a volunteer who loves chocolate. But if you in the audience love steak more than chocolate, imagine a big steak, right? And that visual is representing all your goals, all your dreams, all the things that you want in your life. And I'm going to be placing that chocolate bar somewhere in the room. And you're going to be blindfolded. And the 4 people that are around you are going to take a rope and they're going to loop it over your rope belt so they're kind of tethered to you. And their instruction is to carefully and safely take you to the chocolate bar. You can't see a thing because you're blindfolded.
Right.
And they're all taking you, but they can't do anything except for use the ropes. And they take you over to the chocolate bar. And you succeed in getting to it, right? So that's phase 1 of the exercise. And then I take the chocolate bar and I say, just like in life, when you think you've fully arrived, you don't necessarily, you still have more to do, right?
Sure.
And so I take that chocolate bar and I say, this still represents all your goals and dreams and joy in life. Only this time, the 4 people who are tethered to you, they're going to be blindfolded. And you're going to be able to see where the chocolate bar is, but they won't see where the chocolate bar is. And this time, their job is to not cooperate with you and you getting to the chocolate bar. And at this point, I say to you, Chris, you can do anything you want. You can beg, you can plead, you can negotiate. What would you do in order to, you've got these 4 people tethered to you who are told to not cooperate with you in getting to it? What would you do? So I want you in the audience to think, what would I do? What's the first thing? There's lots of different answers to that. Chris,
Sure.
What would you do?
Oh my gosh, I'd probably be very scared.
Okay, so you might be scared, but you're seeing that chocolate bar.
Yeah.
What would you do?
Well, I certainly want to go to the chocolate bar.
Okay, well, you got 4 people holding you back.
Hold you back, but that's what I want.
Okay, so what are you going to do to make it happen?
I'm gonna negotiate.
So your first go-to would be, I'm going to try to negotiate with people. And how long do you think that would take you to do?
With 4 people, it probably could take quite a bit of time.
Okay.
If you don't have the right tools.
Okay, but if you had the right tools and you did it, it would probably still take a little time.
Just take a little time to convince 4 people. Sure.
Yeah. So that would be your approach. Would be to negotiate. Let's
Sure.
say you tried every trick in your bag to negotiate, and they're still like, "No, I won't. You can't make me." What would you do next?
Well, I'm not an autocratic person, so I'd probably acquiesce to their.
So you might give up?
I don't know if I'd give up, but I don't think I'd go that. I might just go on my own.
How would you do it? They're tied to you.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They are tied to me. They just might have to sit outside while I get their chocolates.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. We usually have lots of different responses from the person in that position. And those of you listening might have had a bunch of thoughts go through your head. Some people say, I'm just going to rush it. Like, I'm going to just use physical force to try to get over to that chocolate bar, right? Especially if they're really big, they might think they can handle that.
Right.
And they might be able to, but there'd probably be some pretty big negative consequences of that, right? And
Right.
and then there are people that say, I would beg, or I would offer a bribe. I would say, look, if you let me go over there, I'll give you part of the chocolate bar or whatever, right? So there's lots of ways that in and of themselves are very telling of how we handle things. But what most people don't see is that I'll usually stop the exercise and say, what kept you from just taking the belt off? Right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because the instructions are you can do anything you want. And we don't hear that. We hear the part that says you can beg, you can plead, you can negotiate, because those are all tried and true things that we've done. And we don't think outside of the box.
It's kind of like leaving the baggage behind.
Yes. I mean, it's the obvious, simplest thing to do. But it even says a lot about us that we don't think of that thought, because the idea of untying ourselves in our mind thinks, now I'm separate from the herd and I won't ever be able to reconnect. And that's a fear of a lot of people.
That's sure.
I had one recently where a woman in the audience, or a woman in the main role, came up with a solution that I had never seen, and I'd done this exercise over 100 times, and it made me look at myself. She said, I would just ask one of the people out in the audience to go get the chocolate bar and bring it to me. Never occurred to me that I would do,
ask somebody else to do it.
Yeah, because they weren't told not to, right? And I was like, where in my life am I not seeing resources that are available to me because I'm not looking and they're right in front of me? Yeah, I mean, that's the way that this deep diving takes you. It takes you into places where you didn't know you had limiting beliefs. You didn't know you had blind spots. And I hesitated to give this exercise up because it's one of the experiential exercises we use in our work. But it's so eye-opening to
very
people.
Much so.
And it's a very visceral experience to be in the room watching the person struggling. And what's really interesting is after we do this exercise, a lot of times we'll say, who thought of this answer? And a bunch of people will say, I thought of that answer. Not even a bunch, usually just very few. And I'll say, why didn't you speak out for her to do that? Well, I didn't think I could. Well, why not? Well, because you were the leader of this and we didn't, you told us, you didn't say we could do that. And I said, well, what if I'm Hitler? Right? and same with the people that are tied to her or him. Why did you obey me to not cooperate with her? Would you do that to somebody in real life if they're trying to go for their hopes and dreams and goals? No. I've never, ever had the team of 4 ever say, I'm not doing that. Never. And all the times I've done it. So see how conditioned we are to operate from limiting beliefs and what we've always known and what we've always thought is possible. And so that's kind of what, that's where the real deep dive happens.
The deep dive is recognizing our limiting beliefs.
Yes.
And doing breaking out and doing it, untying that rope.
Untying that rope over and over and over again in many different ways. Just like me, learning from that exercise, something that I was not aware of that I do in my life. I'm always learning by doing this process. And so being able to help people to really enter fully into the change process is again what we're just diving into. So
I love this diving into change.
Yeah, deep diving can be a great adventure if you face it with courage and with the end game in mind.
It's the analogy I'm thinking of is using the dive. If a scuba diver's getting into the water, what do they need? They need the oxygen.
They need the oxygen. They need to have self-confidence. They need to have faith that everything's going to work and that the people that are around them with the equipment that made the equipment are reliable. There's a lot of things.
They need a plan.
They need a plan.
They can't wing it.
Right. And they need to understand the progression of being good at it. So, it takes some time and practice and it becomes, easier.
Isn't this fascinating work?
It really is. It's really fun. So
and you're getting people to do a lot of deep dives.
Yes, we are, and they're actually enjoying the results and the effects of that because there's nothing more fulfilling than authentically being who we are. Mm-hmm. Like to me, when I say I want people to live their lives and love their lives, I want them to love their life. Well, you can't love your life if you're not awake. You can't love your life if you're not conscious, if you're not making actual, real, free choices.
And that's why we always invite our guests to join us in creating a life that they love.
Yes, absolutely. Please come, join us.
Judy, you're awesome.
Thank you. You are too.
Goodness. Well, Culture Change in a Box is a part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at wholecarenetwork.com and be sure to visit Judy Ryan at lifeworksystems.com. Yes. I'm Chris McClellan. I'm creating a life to love by being with awesome people like Judy Ryan. Judy, thanks for doing this today.
Thank you. You're awesome too, Chris.
Thank you.